All right, well, good evening, everybody. Welcome tonight to Twin Cities Church. Glad you are with us today. Deirdre and I were joking around that, it's not really a thing in Minnesota if we don't mention the weather. How hot is it today? So here's your obligatory weather comment. Yeah. Now we can move on. Whew, it's a hot one. Yep, can't complain though, right? Not going to complain about the weather. No, but we are glad that you're here today. It's been great to work through this series here on who Jesus is. We had that first part of it on the reasons to believe in Jesus. For now, we're in the second part of these challenges, the reasons why it's hard to believe in Jesus. And tonight we'll continue that as we go through it. Let me read the passage for us, and then George will come up and deliver the teaching. So, and the passage is also in the handout. If you need one, it's in the back, or you could always just open up your Bible app. So, Matthew chapter 10, 34 through 39. Do not think that I have come to bring peace to the earth. I have not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I have come to set a man against his father, and a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. And a person's enemies will be those of his own household. Whoever loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me, and whoever loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And whoever does not take his cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Whoever finds his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life for my sake will find it.
Good evening, good afternoon. Good to see you all. So this is one of Jesus's more challenging statements, probably one of the more controversial. It's one of these that really communicates his intent to create conflict and division. And as Deirdre pointed out a few weeks ago in the sermon with John the Baptist, who was imprisoned, he took offense. He took offense at Jesus. And we saw that Jesus really does intend to be offensive. And there's a reason for that. It's because we need offensive things in our lives. Otherwise, we'll just kind of keep going and brush aside any challenges that come our way. But when we're offended, it forces us to stop and think. It forces us to stop and think about what's being said and about the person that is saying that to us or the people that are offending us. And so this passage falls within the context of Jesus preparing his disciples for the ministry. He's just called all 12 of them. And so these were the core 12 that he was sending out in all of the villages of Israel to proclaim the gospel of the kingdom, to teach people about Jesus Christ. And basically he said, listen, this is a tough call. It's going to be filled with challenges and conflict, and there's a lot of statements in the passages that don't apply to us as readers because they were specific. It was, when you go into this village, go to a home, if there's a man of peace, enter into the house and stay there the whole time as you proclaim the gospel in that town. If there's not a man of peace and they don't take you into their house or they don't want you in the village, brush the dust off of your shoes in judgment of them and go on to the next one. So there's some things that we're not called to apply. But this passage today is something that is going to relate to all Christians. He's basically saying that I will be the cause of conflict in families. And it's not a passive thing, as Jesus isn't saying, I'm going to do this, this, and that, and it's going to happen to cause conflict in your households. He's saying, I have come not to bring peace, but I have come with a sword. I have come in order to create hostility. I have come in order to create conflict in your families. And he says it twice in this long passage to the disciples. And so it's pretty clear that Jesus expects and Jesus is planning on and Jesus is intending to create conflict and division within households. And this is the reason why a lot of people don't follow Jesus. They don't want to create conflict in their homes. Now, it seems contradictory, Jesus' statement, to where he says, I am coming to bring conflict. I am coming with a sword to create hostility in your families. Because earlier, in the same book, Matthew, in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says, blessed are the peacemakers. And so Jesus holds up and honors and blesses peacemakers. And later, the Apostle Paul is criticizing those who come in and upset whole families. And so there's a work that the elders of churches are supposed to do to prevent families being upset. And so we've got Jesus heralding and holding up peace and peacemakers, and we've got Jesus saying, I am coming not for peace, but to create hostility. So what is going on here? So there are a few ideas that I want to explore more deeply to get into this passage and to understand exactly what Jesus is saying. So the first idea I want to talk about is the idea of peace. And as I was preparing for this passage, I remembered an incident. When I was in college, I was visiting a friend, and her mom had a really severe case of OCD, of obsessive compulsive disorder. And I was in the kitchen, I was getting a drink of water, and I moved the faucet. And, I just turn on the cold water, get a drink, turn off the cold water, boom. Well, I had moved the faucet from the perpendicular position. Like it was at a 90-degree angle. The sink was spotless. And so my friend, she came up and she moved it back into a perpendicular position with the sink. And she said this, she said, we've got to keep the peace. We've got to keep the peace. And I turned to her and I said, that's not peace. That's not peace. There's not peace in your mom. Your mom isn't at peace because the sink faucet is perpendicular. You're not at peace because you're walking around on pins and needles trying to make sure that everything is just so you don't draw the wrath of your mother. And I said, clearly there's not peace between you and your mom. So that's not peace. That's not peace. It's accommodating based upon a lot of fear. Fear that the mom has, fear that she has, and conflict that exists between them and not wanting to stir that up anymore. Now, I'm not saying she should have been doing something different with trying to keep peace, with being familiar with a household with challenges like OCD. You do things like that, but you can't call it peace. And oftentimes that's what our efforts towards peace are. They are things that we do to keep external conflict down, and it really doesn't address the internal dynamics going on, and it really doesn't create a setting of peace. Note that the conflicts that Jesus refers to, so he says sons are going to be against their fathers, daughters are going to be against their mothers, and daughters-in-law are going to be against the mothers-in-law. And so these are all conflicts between subordinates and authorities in a household. And Jesus later says that. He said, I have come to bring conflict in your households. And there's two directions to the conflict that Jesus mentions. So there's later in the passage, he says there are children who love their parents more than Jesus, and then there are parents who love their children more than Jesus. And so it's this bidirectional. And so what you see here are parents and children in the name of love, seeking to keep the peace in their households, and in seeking the peace, there's going to be a rejection of Jesus Christ. All right, so let's hold that idea of peace up. Peace being just generally the absence of conflict and the presence of harmony and contentment and quiet and tranquility. So with this dynamic of love that Jesus brings up, this love that parents have for children, this love that children have for parents. So the term love is always expressing or trying to communicate something that you have strong affections for. So when you say you love somebody, there's a strong affection for somebody. Now, the difference between the English terms for love, which is basically love, there's only one term. There are multiple terms that the Greek language uses for the word love, and it's really helpful because even though the word love communicates affection, the varying terms that the Greek language uses reflects a different motivation or different reason for the affection. So the love in the context that Jesus speaks of here is called phileo, friendship, brotherly love. And it's a love that's based upon relationship. And so children love their parents because those people are their parents. Parents love their kids because those people are their kids. If you were to just throw them out in the middle of a room with a big crowd, and they didn't have those relationships, it's unlikely that there would be an affection for them. But there is an affection simply because of the relationship that's been established. If there's no relationship, there's no love. No filial love, anyway. So this would be in contrast to loving somebody because of their character, or loving somebody because of their value, or their worthiness, or their beauty even. Okay, so it's not an affection. It's not a feeling based upon anything about that person. It's everything to do with the relationship. And so in these relationship-based affections, there are expectations and obligations. There are relationships of loyalty. There's love based upon a loyalty. And so if everybody is contributing to that relationship according to the obligations and expectations, there's peace. Parents have expectations upon their kids. Kids have their expectations upon their parents. And as long as those are working, as long as those relationships remain loyal, there's peace. So what are the things that these relationships provide? They provide a sense of belonging, a sense that you're needed, a sense that these people have affection for you, that they approve of you, that they think that you are a worthy person because of this relationship. And there's a reciprocity of these things, so there's give and take, that you're important to somebody. So these are important aspects of these relationships. But the question that we need to ask is, are these the type of things that automatically produce or reinforce peace, the absence of conflict? I would say that this type of affection that is based upon relationship and these mutual obligations and expectations, I would say that is somewhat of a fragile love. It's a fragile love because it's dependent upon another person's response. It's dependent upon all of the people being loyal to those relationships. And so we have to ask the question, what happens then when those expectations and obligations aren't met? What happens when we can no longer fulfill what the expectations are? If we're a child, even a grown child, and our parents are no longer acting in a way that we think parents should, what do? Or if we are a parent and our kids are being rebellious and they're not loyal to the relationship, they're not loyal to the household, what do we do about the dynamic of peace? It's upsetting. And that's why there's violence and that's why there's conflict that Jesus refers to, because what Jesus is saying, he's going to come into the lives of people and he's going to create circumstances where people have to decide between following him and following their family. He's going to challenge the obligations and the expectations of these relationships. And what happens is that eventually these these relationships become enslaving. You know, just like my friend and how she had to leave the faucet. She had to do that, or else the wrath of her mother would come down on her. And so if we, you know, obviously when we're small children and we have parents, there's a need for us to follow what they want for us to do because it's the best thing for us. But as, you know, teenage children, as grown children, the dynamics are going to change. And if those adult children are starting to think differently than the parents, they have a challenge. Do I maintain loyalty to my parents and live under this growing burden of pleasing them, or do I branch out on my own and start to do what I think is better for me or whatever the circumstances or what is true? And the same with parents and children. A lot of times, you know, the parents want their kids to grow up and do what they did and become what they became, and there are obligations that that when the kids aren't doing that, the parents feel like they've got to do whatever they need to do to make sure the children do what make them happy. And so you just have these relationships that ultimately become enslaving because they don't want to give up on what the relationship provides. The sense of belonging, the sense of feeling needed, the sense of being important. That's what these relationships do. And we come to this third term of life. And Jesus says if we find life, then we ultimately end up losing it. But if we lose our lives for his sake, we will ultimately find it. And so he's not obviously talking about the physical life. He's not talking about staying alive. And he's not talking about, he's not telling people not to pursue their gifts and their talents and their abilities. There are things that God has given us and called us to pursue for our lives. If we take it in the context of this passage, what Jesus is referring to is approaching life in pursuit of love and peace. How are you pursuing love? How are you pursuing affection? We all long to be loved. We all long for somebody to have strong affections towards us. We all long to have somebody that we can show affections to. And so that desire to love, that desire to be loved, is a strong force for us as human beings in what we pursue to bring us life. And peace is the same thing. Who wants to direct their lives towards conflict? Who wants to direct their lives towards hostility? No, we want to be at peace within ourselves. We want to be at peace with those that we love. And so these are two strong driving forces that I think Jesus is addressing that can be guides to our life. And so what he's saying is that if you pursue life with those primary objectives in mind, I want to find love and I want to find peace. In pursuit of those things, you're ultimately going to be disappointed. Because whatever it is you pursue for life, to fulfill that desire for love, to fulfill that desire for peace, eventually you're going to discover that the sources that you've found, because you've found life, you've found something that can provide this. Eventually what he's saying is that they're going to disappoint you. They're going to let you down. They're going to rebel against you, or you're going to break under the pressure to conform to whatever requirements they have for that relationship to continue. That's what happens. It's either rebellion or it's either you break under the pressure because you can't continue to live up to the requirements that the relationship has. And so Jesus is saying you are going to experience loss if you pursue life just for love and just for peace. Jesus has a lot of statements where he says, it doesn't benefit you to gain the world and lose your soul. He's not talking about that kind of thing. I think he's actually saying the practical outcome of your pursuit of love and peace is going to just be extremely disappointing to you. You're not going to find what you're looking for. But Jesus says that if we lose our life, if we give up our pursuits of what we think is going to bring us love, if we give up our pursuits of what's going to give us peace, if we give them up for his sake, then we'll actually find those things. And so I think that Jesus doesn't want us to not consider those things. He doesn't want us to not respond to our desire for love. He doesn't want us to not respond to our desire for peace. What he wants us to recognize is that we don't really have the capacity to know what's going to give us those things. One of the, I've commented and quoted it from a few times from up here, that book, The Good Life, which is this study of happiness. I think it's in chapter 3. They have this huge section that shows that what the science has proven is that human beings have a good idea about what they envision for happiness. They know that it's got to have something to do with relationships, for example. But what they say is that what the science proves is that human beings are absolutely terrible at getting to those and acquiring them. We have an idea that relationships are going to do it, but we have no idea on how to get there. And that's what Jesus is wanting us to understand. We have an aspiration for love and peace, but we have to recognize that we have no idea in what we're doing to achieve it. Our surrender, when he says, if you lose your life, it's the call that Jesus makes for us to surrender our own ideas about what's going to bring us love and peace, our own ability to acquire it, and to first direct our desire for love and peace to Jesus Christ himself. These are natural desires that we have. These are natural longings that we have, but they have been corrupted. And in our pursuit of these things, love and peace, in our corrupt state, the things that we put into those boxes to provide us love and peace, they can only go so far in their ability to provide it, but soon they become enslaving idols. And what we actually see in this passage is that Jesus has a stronger claim on our affections. So again, our affections, what we love. And he has a stronger claim on his ability to provide what we need. So Jesus has love and affection for us, and he calls us to him. If you lose life for my sake, if you come and follow me, then you're going to find life. You're going to find love. You're going to find peace. And so Jesus has a claim on us from a relationship standpoint. There is a filial love that we are to have for Jesus, that Jesus already has for us, based upon a relationship. Just like a parent has a relationship with their child and a child has a relationship with their parent, Jesus has a relationship with us because he is our creator. He is our creator. Parental love and child love, that interfamily love, is an image of what Jesus provides for us. Okay, so just like it seems like parents kind of create their children, they give birth to a child. It took both of them for that child to be born and to come into this world, but they weren't the creators. They didn't create life. God put in place by creating man and woman in his image. They are life-bearing, but it all is a part of what God created and how God created those parents in his image and now how God created that child in his image. It all goes back to how God created. And so Jesus' filial love towards this is a stronger claim. We are fearfully and wonderfully made. Our bodies, our personalities, everything about us, our identities, our differences, Jesus has made each one of us special and unique and fearfully made. But he doesn't always have filial love. He has agape love. Agape love. Agape love is a love not based upon relationship. Jesus has one with us, but agape love is based purely upon the high value that you place on somebody. You hold them in high regard. You think they are worthy. You think they are beautiful. You think they are magnificent. You love them because of who they are. That's agape love. And that's the kind of love that Jesus has for us, all humanity. It's the classic verse, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. That is an agape love. We are valuable to Jesus Christ, not because of what we can do for him, but because of what he has already done for us in creating us. And it's not something that we have to perform for. It's not something that we have to earn. But what about peace as we close up here? So Jesus promises this love, and it seems like in the passage that love between a parent and a child, that affection, all right, is the foundation then for what they want to have is for peace. So they see the love as a means to the peace. But Jesus, he gives us the love and he promises the love, and it sits there as a foundation. And it's there, but what he doesn't promise is peace. Peace in terms of how we generally understand it. What he does promise, he actually promises that we're going to have conflict. He actually promises that we are going to have hostility because of him. So if we come to him with an amazing amount of love, an overwhelming amount of love, but also conflict. And here's what you see in a relationship with Jesus Christ. Well, let me take a step back. Here's what you see in the world. There is internal conflict, but exterior peace, like my friend with her mom. They kept the peace on the outside, but inside there's no peace. That's what the world provides. With Jesus, what he promises is an interior peace because his love is so overwhelming. So the prayer out of Ephesians chapter 3, that we would experience and know through the power of the Holy Spirit working in us, which is the Spirit of Jesus Christ in us. We're one with Jesus Christ. What the prayer there is that we would know every dimension, the height and breadth and width and depth of God's love, so that we could experience the fullness of God. And so what Jesus says is, I'm going to give my love to you. You're going to experience belonging. You're going to experience identity. You're going to experience affection. You're going to experience a fullness that's going to give you the ability to handle the exterior conflict that I'm also promising. So in the world we have interior conflict and exterior peace. With Jesus, we have interior peace in the midst of exterior conflict, but we still are able to experience that peace. And that internal peace means that comes with freedom. There's our consciences are clear. There's no burden of guilt that we are carrying around. There's no burden to perform for somebody that we're carrying around. There's no proving of ourselves. It's completely free. We're free to do what is right, not what other people are pressuring us to do. That internal peace is really what we long for, and it's really what Jesus is providing. And that conflict that Jesus promises is not the last word. Jesus says, if you do not take up your cross, you're not worthy of me. And the readers would have known the story. The readers of the gospel would have known the story that Jesus took his cross and was crucified and died on our behalf. And so what Jesus is asking for is to trust him with our lives, to give up our lives. Obviously, he's not calling everybody to be crucified. By God's grace, I'm not sure, I don't think anybody is performing crucifixions anymore, but just as I thought about that, I think that there has been some actual crucifixions by groups persecuting Christians even in this modern day. But that's not what all of us are called to. As we later will see in the New Testament instructions, okay, there are all kinds of ways that we are called to give up our lives. Husbands are to sacrifice their lives for the sole benefit of their wives and their children. Wives are called to give up their lives for the benefit of their husbands and their children. All of those instructions that come in the New Testament are expressions of how we all put this into practice. There's a willingness to give up our life and to make the sacrifice that Jesus is asking us to do in order to experience a love from him that we are then able to give out to the world. And the conflict and the trial and the toil and the challenges that are sure to come and the persecutions that are sure to come are not the last word, but they are the means through which we will ultimately experience the life that Jesus is providing. Let me say a quick prayer. Lord God, we understand that our pursuits of all of the things in this world ultimately bring a lot of disappointment. And we recognize, and God, if we're honest with ourselves, that we have experienced disappointment in putting too much affection into the things that we think are going to give us life outside of you. So our prayer tonight would be that we would be able to clearly see and believe that Jesus is the source of life and that we would be willing to lay down our own pursuits and to pursue him. In your Son's name we pray. Amen. All right. So, got some time for some questions or for some comments on that passage. I think we probably have some questions up here. Did you make some questions, Lauren? Yeah. So, what do you find surprising or challenging in the text? How does it change or expand your view of Jesus? And how does it connect to our witness in the world? So, some things to get us started there.
It's definitely a challenging passage in just the sense of like it really is it doesn't sound like Jesus.
Yep.
If that makes sense. When you hear all of this chapter, doesn't really sound like Jesus though, where he's telling them, yeah, go into the city and I'm sending you out like sheep among wolves and go here and then leave there and do this. And I didn't come to bring peace, but a sword. Yeah.
It's a mission. Jesus is on a clear mission.
Yeah, he doesn't seem to be this kind of like cultural picture of this peacemaker in this chapter. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Any thoughts, comments here for George on the sermon? In the back.
What is meant by take up your cross? I've always kind of, through context cues, guessed what it means, but what's your definition?
Well, it obviously later on in the story, Jesus takes up his cross. He's asked to carry the cross that he's going to be crucified on. He can't carry it the whole way. Crucifixion was a known form of punishment in that day. It's not unusual to read accounts of the Romans would line the roads with crosses that they were crucifying people on to demonstrate, and to prevent and to kind of deter people from rebellion. And so I think what it means is that there needs to be a willingness to lose your life for the sake of Christ. And again, he's not saying that everybody's going to be crucified. He's not saying everybody's going to be persecuted like the disciples were going into those villages. But it's a mindset that he has called his people to recognize that in Jesus' giving up of his own life, there's an indebtedness that we have to him. And the call to reciprocate that sacrifice. Lawrence, you may have some comments on that. I think that's just the general idea. Does that make sense?
I should have stayed in the back. It's good. Get your steps in.
Again, I think it's helpful when we go to the New Testament, we're reading Peter's letters or Paul's letters or whatever, and we see all these instructions for Christian behavior. We need to see those instructions in the context of Jesus' teaching here. Okay, we're not disciples going into villages sharing the gospel. Okay, we're in homes, we're in workplaces, we're in neighborhoods, we're in schools. And so all those instructions that there are in the New Testament about living amongst the world, living with your family, those are all instructions that at the core have to be coming out of this willingness to lose our lives for the sake of Jesus Christ. It just looks different depending on the context that we're in. William?
It's kind of interesting because my reading today was actually Luke chapter 9. The reflection of Matthew here this morning. But anyways, I remember 12 years ago, I listened to a pastor from India that came here, and he was talking about how it is very, very difficult for Christian people to give up their life for Jesus. And he did an example story of a couple who was very known Christian people, and people look up to them, and one day they had a child, and then unfortunately through a series of events, the child died. And the couple slowly gave up believing in God. But he was pointing out that how we put our relationship, we kind of surround our relationship of Christianity through people. And he was saying like how it's a challenge for us to actually let go of that type of relationship and just focus, or just willing to give our life to the Lord. And I'm just wondering, why is it such a challenge for us to do that?
I think that if we hold Jesus in this place, I mean, if we don't get, if our life doesn't turn out like we expect, then Jesus is in a place like we put our parents, for example. We don't have to put our parents in this place, but it's this dependent relationship that's good as long as there's a sense of loyalty. You do, Jesus, what I need you to do, and I'll love you. And I think that's where a lot of us can hold Christ. And I think that's, if we're honest, that's probably where we hold a lot of our relationships. As long as you are loyal to this relationship and act in a way that I need you to, then we're going to have a good relationship. And that's not the kind of love that Christ calls us to. We're called to an agape love for each other. But I think a lot of us do have that filial base of love that's based upon this mutual set of obligations and expectations, and when those things aren't met, then I'm throwing out the relationship. That's what Jesus is saying, is that you've got to get to the point where you are willing to give your life to me. And whatever that means, that's what Jesus is, that's what discipleship, that's what following Jesus is.
But it's also just kind of fascinating, too, to think of the rest of the gospel here of, like, I was just thinking of, like, right after this, I mean, or even how we can, some of us, right, respond with a difficulty, but then the disciples respond with, yeah, I'm all on board, Jesus, right? I mean, Peter, they are uber confident that they're never going to, I will give everything for you. And then right away they start bickering about who's going to be sitting next to Jesus in heaven when he comes, or like in the new, like they're super confident.
Well, Jesus tells him, you're all going to leave me when I get arrested.
Right.
And they all said, no, we're
No
not
way.
going to leave you, Jesus. And they
That's right.
came, and they all split,
Yeah, absolutely. Because sometimes we hear that. I think I was really struck by in that passage, just where Jesus kind of like, just uses the needle of, pushes that of like, not worthy, right? Not worthy of me, not worthy of me, not worthy of me, like 3 times. That is a big fear, right? That I'm sure, all of us feel, of just like, am I not worthy of Jesus? Or the disciples would feel that too. I'm not worthy of him. But then knowing what he did for us, like you said, like that agape love towards us, not the feel, like it's not based on the fact that we were worthy enough for him, but he still loved us enough. Makes it possible to give our lives.
right?
Kind of after he gave his life. Like if he didn't die and rise from the dead, this is just kind of sounds very religion-y,
Yeah.
cult-like.
And I think it's hard, maybe somebody has this question. As I was working on this, it's hard to see Christianity not as a performance-based religion because there's so many commandments and asks that Jesus has of us. That's why it doesn't make sense unless you get the gospel. And even when you get the gospel, you got to keep preaching the gospel to yourself because the burdens and the commandments can feel at times really overwhelming. But when you experience that love, it changes all of that. It just does, and that's really the nonsense of the gospel, I guess, that Paul talks about, and it just doesn't make sense. But once you feel that love, it all makes sense. So, anybody else? Amy. I tried to make it really clear, so if you guys don't have any questions, I guess that's good.
I know what you're talking about for love and peace. It transcends just our family dynamics.
Yeah.
But since it's using the
Yeah.
family dynamics here as an example, I've found at times when it's been hard with either my parents or sibling or whatever it might be if I'm judging things based on that filial relationship, like, well, I want you're my mom, I'm expecting you to act this way, or you're my dad, or you're my sister, I want you to do X, Y, and Z for me because I have this picture in my head of what that should look like. That can get very frustrating when other humans are not doing what we want them to do. But I don't know exactly what happened, probably just through being in the church longer and understanding the gospel more, but I found that there are times when I'm able to kind of take that relationship dynamic out of the equation and just see like, okay, this person, this is my parent or this is my sibling, but they're more than just my parent or my sibling. Like this is another person created by God. This is a brother or sister in Christ, or even if they're not, just this is another human being who is broken and fallen and struggles with sin, and trying to see them through that lens more so than, well, this is my dad, this is my mom, this is my sister. What do I want from them? But more so like, okay, if this was somebody just in my church family, like how would I be responding to them differently than I would to my mom or dad based off of my expectations? So I don't know if that's helpful at all to people, but I don't know. I think just, like that lens of what are we, from our relationship dynamics, what lens are we seeing people through? How can we take our own desires and needs out of that, laying down our life maybe, or taking up that cross to love and serve the people around us instead of demanding or expecting. So I don't know. That just came to mind as I was listening to you with this sermon.
That's a good insight. I think it's hard for people to wrap their minds around. I mean, unless you just have been constantly fighting or rebelling with your family or have no strong family background, it's hard for people to comprehend a set of relationships that kind of exists on a higher plane than the household, you know. And I don't know everybody's stories in here, but my guess is that a lot of us have had family dynamics, moms and dads, maybe even grandparents, where there's conflict because of our choices, you know, and you can feel the pressure, you know, and how those get resolved is different all the time. But I think we probably have all experienced that to some degree, where our parents want us to grow up and do things a certain way and to follow in their footsteps and to whatever, and that just doesn't work.
Other comments, questions, thoughts? Debbie?
I think I may be missing one of your big points. So you maybe already said this, but I think I'm hearing, you know, human relationships, conflict is inevitable. But what is the conflict that Christ is coming specifically to bring? Because, you know, these verses are making it sound very intentionally bringing conflict. So aside from just, you know, our failures as human beings and
Right.
conflict that comes, what exactly was it that Christ
think-
is bringing?
I think the issue is the issue of loyalty. I think that I mean, just from the standpoint of parents and their expectations upon children, I think that there's this natural tendency for parents to have this perspective of what their children should be and grow up into, and to follow in their footsteps, or whatever dream that they have for them. What Christ introduces into a household and into the individuals within that household is a call to follow him. And so the call to follow Jesus, I mean, if you have parents that, you know, they're Christian parents, they want you to grow up and serve the Lord in whatever capacity that is. They're just going to be happy that you're a Christian, happy that you're following Jesus. I'm not talking about that kind of a situation. I'm talking about where you have a child that grows up in a household that doesn't know the Lord. Somewhere along the line, that child comes to know Jesus Christ and has a strong sense of call, and there's spiritual gifts, and they want to maybe get married and raise a family in a particular way that's different than the tradition of that original household. And so Jesus is going to call people to be disloyal to their families, not betraying them from like a moral standpoint, just not fulfilling what the family expectations are and whatever tradition that they've grown up in. So I think it's the issue of loyalty. Does that make sense? I mean, I know enough of your stories in here to where that was a huge dynamic of where there's genuine faith, where there wasn't in the parents, and the either choice of careers, choice of church, choice of faith, choice of who they were marrying, choice of where they were going to school, choice of where they wanted to live. I mean, I've heard it all from this church. Their parents did not approve, and it creates, I mean, just a week and a half ago, Ann and I were sitting with a couple that just were trying to work through some conversations that they need to have with their family, knowing that it was going to create conflict based upon their faith-based decisions, you know? So that's not insignificant.
Other thoughts, comments, questions at all? Walter.
While you're running back there, Lawrence, it's going to be increasingly challenging as we share the gospel and be witnesses with people, and challenging them with Jesus, because becoming a Christian now means that you're becoming a hateful bigot. You know, I mean, it's not just your family; it's just they're going to be the whole culture that's going to think that you're an evil person now. You know, so Walter.
So I sort of always read this in the way that you just described it, of the contrast between believing in God and trusting in Him versus family members who don't. But the loyalty thing seems to fit, even if everyone is a Christian and following God. If you grew up in a good household and you're close with your family or really close, and if that takes priority over following God, then the other question I had was sort of what Debbie said with what's this conflict that's going to come up, or is it intentional to test your loyalty?
Mm-hmm.
And then I guess those are just two comments. I don't really have a question. But then the third one is, does church fit here too? There's plenty of churches, and they're all good, but like, if you're too loyal to your church family and not to God, is that possible?
You know, basically anywhere legalism exists and the desire to perform and love is based upon some performance standard, it's going to exist. Anytime you feel burdened to do something not out of joy and love, but out of a desire to please people, that's going to create this dynamic. So a lot of churches have that dynamic.
And then the gospel shows up and there's conflict.
That's exactly right. I'm sure that there has been that feeling in our church, probably even from me. That's not my desire. But I would affirm, Walter, what you said in terms of the challenge of loyalty does also exist in Christian households. Absolutely, yeah.
Any other questions, comments?
Thanks,
All right.
everybody. Enjoy your nice, warm, record-breaking, 88-degree evening. Actually, it's